Hi there, everyone. Glenn G. and Grandy here with you on YesNetwork.com, and welcome to the season's first edition of Fantasy Frontline. Joining me today is Joe Oriema. Now, Joe, whether you're in a 10-team league or a 12-team league, the prevailing theory generally in fantasy football is that you need to get two stud running backs with your first two picks in order to be successful. Does that still hold true, or might some GMs be better off taking a running back and a wide receiver, maybe even two wide receivers, or some other combination?
Glenn, at this point, I think it's more like an NFL GM drafting his team. You go for the best player that's available on the board at that time. You know, you do want to grab a running back in the first round or the first two rounds, but you know what? If a guy like Randy Moss is there, Terrell Owens, you might want to, draft those guys with the second pick, or a good quarterback too. You could draft a guy like Tom Brady or Peyton Manning if they are available in that second round.
Now, you talked about a couple of elite quarterbacks there. One guy who really burst onto the scene last year, Derek Anderson from the Cleveland Browns. Going into the season, people didn't even know if he was going to win the job over Brady Quinn quarterbacking the Browns. He did, and he went on to have a fantastic year.
Right.
Is there a quarterback or two out there who might emerge from obscurity, kind of come out of nowhere, and really become a viable fantasy option for GMs?
Well, one guy I'm looking at right now is Aaron Rodgers. This guy he's coming out of the shadow of Brett Favre. This is his team. It was made known to him in the offseason that this is his team, so that's got to be a confidence builder. Plus, he's getting a team that was 13-3 last year, so you know they have weapons. They have Ryan Grant at running back, so they have a good running game. They have Greg Jennings and Donald Driver as his weapons of choice at wide receiver. So he really has a lot of weapons around him, and I see Aaron Rodgers having a very good season. Another guy to look for is the Denver Broncos quarterback, and that's Jay Cutler. Jay Cutler really, had a mediocre season, 7-9 Broncos team last year, but it was found out that on May 1st that he had type 1 diabetes. He's been taking diabetes shots, some insulin. His body's been reacting well to the shots, and he says he hasn't felt this strong since he was a quarterback back at Vanderbilt.
Now, veteran fantasy players, many of them might say that it's really easy for owners to make picks in the first and second round, and that the leagues are really won in the middle rounds where guys can make steals. Who are some players who might be falling from being high picks previously to maybe mid-round selections and possible sleepers now this year?
Well, you look at a guy like Marvin Harrison. Marvin Harrison had an injury-plagued season last year. This is a guy that was, a top 2-3 pick in previous drafts. Now, with the emergence of Reggie Wayne, you look at his injuries from last season, he could slip down to the 5th, 6th round, and that could be a real sleeper for a lot of fantasy owners out there. You look at a guy like Reggie Bush. A lot of expectations on him in his first couple of seasons. Didn't reach the end zone like many owners thought he was going to. But you know what? Reggie Bush could finally have that breakout season coming out of the backfield, catching passes, having that breakout run, a lot of touchdowns. I see that happening for Reggie Bush this year. And another guy is Donovan McNabb. Another quarterback that hasn't been able to stay on the field. He said he's feeling better than ever. You got to believe Donovan McNabb when he talks. And you know what? If Donovan McNabb is saying that he's not injured, I say, you know what? Take a chance on Donovan McNabb in the middle rounds.
I've still got some concerns about that Eagles receiving core with McNabb. But going back to Bush for a second, unless you were in a point-per-reception league, last year Bush had a fantastic year catching the ball out of the Saints' backfield. But if you weren't in a PPR league, for the most part, Bush was, let's be honest, a bust.
Yes, he
was. Now, looking ahead to this year, who are some players that you think might wind up being bust candidates, guys who don't necessarily have any health problems, but just guys that you might want to stay clear from?
Right. Well, I mean, look at a guy like Ben Roethlisberger. Big Ben last year had his best fantasy season. And this year, they drafted Rashard Mendenhall. They have Willie Parker. They're going to really go to a heavy ground game. So I see Ben Roethlisberger's numbers kind of going back to where they were over his first couple of seasons, not throwing the ball a lot, heavy ground game. Another guy that I look at is Lendell White. This guy ran for 1,000 yards last year. I have no clue how. They drafted Chris Johnson. Basically, I think Lendell White is going to be a non-factor in fantasy leagues this year.
Now, finally, we've got to talk about injuries. They can submarine your team no matter how good your draft goes. If, for example, if you took Steven Jackson, say, 3rd overall last year in your drafts, or 2nd overall maybe in some cases, you pretty much got hosed through no real fault of your own. Jackson, he's holding out now, but as far as injuries are concerned, players like Steve Smith, Willis McGahee, Antonio Gates, these are brand names with health concerns. Are they guys that owners are going to want to steer clear from, or could they be potential sleepers, steals perhaps?
Glenn, stay away. Steve Smith already suspended for the first 2 games of the season. He's always injury prone. Stay away from Steve Smith. I was a Steve Smith owner last year. I thought between him and Randy Moss, I had the greatest receiving core, and he just let me down. You look at Willis McGahee, he's coming off knee surgery, and for a running back, that really raises a red flag. You want to stay away from McGahee. And you look at Antonio Gates, he's saying at a training camp this year that foot injury, he's coming off foot surgery, that foot injury is really still a problem, and he's still feeling pain. That's got to raise a red flag. Now, the only way that you want to pick up these guys is if you see them in later rounds. If you already have depth on your team, then draft them. But other than that, I'd say stay away.
I don't blame you, Joe. One other guy that I think that should be stay away from, Ronnie Brown, coming off a torn ACL. Oh, he was having a fantastic season last year. He could have carried fantasy teams to titles, but he tore his ACL, was out for the season. He's having some mental issues. He's even admitted that he hasn't been running the same, the cuts, he's not all the way there. And when you hear red flags like that coming up from a running back, you got to stay away.
Absolutely.
Joe, thank you very much for joining me. That's going to finish up this edition of Fantasy Frontline. But keep on coming back to YesNetwork.com for all the latest on the Yankees as they chase a playoff spot in the American League. For Joe Oriema, I'm Glenn Giangrandy saying thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.